Let's go. Today is Genesis 13:10. And Lot raised his eyes and saw the whole plain of the Jordan, that it was all well watered, before Jehovah had destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of Jehovah, like the land of Egypt, as you come to Zoar. And Lot raised his eyes means that his outer self was enlightened by his inner self, and saw the whole plain of the Jordan symbolizes the goodness and truth that existed in his outer self. That is, that it was all well watered means that they are able to grow there. Before Jehovah had destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, symbolizes the outer self as destroyed by evil cravings and false or distorted convictions.
Convictions.
Convictions, like belief. Convictions. Like distorted.
Distorted.
It's like deformed, distorted, crooked. Like the garden of Jehovah symbolizes the rational ideas of the outer self, like the land of Egypt as you come to Zoar symbolizes facts acquired as a result of the desire for what is good. The symbolism here is that the Lord witnessed his outer self at its most beautiful when united with his inner self. Lot raised his eyes means that his outer self was enlightened by his inner self. This can be seen from the meaning of raising one's eyes as seeing and in an inner sense as perceiving. Here it means being enlightened because it is said of Lot or the outer self. When the outer self perceives what is own qualities when united with the inner self, in other words, when it is at its most beautiful, it is being enlightened by the inner self. It is experiencing divine vision, which is the topic of discussion here. No one can doubt that when the Lord was young, his outer self often enjoyed this divine power of sight because he alone was to unite his outer self with his inner. His outer self was his human quality, but his inner self was his divine quality. And so the whole plain of the Jordan symbolizes the goodness and truth that existed his in his outer self, as can be seen from the symbolism of a plain and the Jordan. In an inner sense, the plain surrounding the Jordan symbolizes the outer self, with everything in it that is good or true. The reason the Jordan basin symbolizes these things is that the Jordan was a boundary for the land of Canaan. As previous remarks have shown, the land of Canaan symbolizes the Lord's kingdom and church, and specifically its heavenly and spiritual attributes, which is why it is also called the Holy Land and the heavenly Canaan. And since it symbolizes the Lord's kingdom and church, in the highest sense, it symbolizes the Lord himself, who is the all in all of his kingdom and church. As a consequence, everything in the land of Canaan carried a representative meaning. Sites in the middle of the land, its most central parts, in other words, represented the Lord's inner self. Mount Zion, for instance, represented his heavenly qualities and Jerusalem his spiritual ones. More distant locations represented traits more remote from internal ones. The most distant points, the borders, represented his outer self. Canaan had many borders. In general, they were the two rivers of the Euphrates and the Jordan and the sea as well. So the Euphrates and the Jordan represented his outward aspects. Here then the Jordan basin symbolizes just as it represents Here then the Jordan basin symbolizes just as it represents all the properties of his outer being. The case is similar when the land of Canaan stands for the Lord's kingdom in the heavens, similar when it stands for the Lord's church on earth, similar when it stands for the individual member of his kingdom of church, similar when it stands abstractly for the heavenly attributes of love and so on. This is why at almost This is why almost all the cities and in fact all the mountains, hills, valleys, rivers and other features of the land of Canaan played a representative role. Because the river Euphrates was a boundary, it represented the sense, impression and facts that belonged to the outer self as shown earlier. The Jordan and the Jordan plain did too, as the following passages demonstrate. In David. My God, my soul is bowing down. Bowing.
Bowing.
Bowing. My God, my soul is bowing. Is bowing down upon me.
Bowing.
Bowing. Bowing. My God, my soul is bowing down upon me. Therefore I will remember you from the land of Jordan, and I will remember the Hermons from the little mountain. The land of Jordan here stands for something lowly and accordingly something remote from heavenly qualities like our superficial traits which are remote from our deeper ones. The children of Israel crossed the Jordan when they entered the land of Canaan, and at their crossing the river parted. This also represented entry to the inner self through the outer and an individual's entry into the Lord's kingdom as well, among other things. Because our outer self constantly attacks our inner self and tries to gain control over it, the boast of the Jordan or the smelling pride of the Jordan, swelling or the swelling pride, swelling,
Swelling.
swelling like elevation, swelling pride of the Jordan, swelling pride. And the Jordan became a standard phrase among the prophets. In Jeremiah, for instance, how will you prove yourself the equal of horses, and in a land of peace you are smug, but how do you behave in the swelling pride of the Jordan? Smug. It's like complacent.
Complacent.
Complacent. Complacent. Smug. But the swelling pride of the Jordan stands for aspects of our outer self that rise up and try to dominate our inner self as attempts at rationalization.
Attempts.
Effort, try, attempts. As attempts at realization, the horse is here, and a consequent smugness. Do. Smugness. 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 In the same author, Edom will become a ruin. Look like a lion, he will go up from the boast of the Jordan to the dwelling of Ethan. The boast of the Jordan stands for pride lifted up by our outer self against the goodness and truth of our inner self. In Zechariah. Howl 30.
How.
Howl. Howl like moan. Howl. Howl 30.
Fur.
30. Fir. Howl 30. Because the cedar has fallen, because the majestic ones have been ravaged. Wail, oaks of Bashan, because the walled forest
Walled.
walled forest has come down. The sound of the wailing of the shepherds, because their majesty has been ravaged. Ravaged.
Ravaged.
Ravaged. Has been ravaged. The sound of the roaring of young lions. That the boast of the Jordan has been ravaged. Numbers 34:12 shows that the Jordan was the boundary of the land of Canaan, and Joshua 15:5 shows that it was the eastern border of the land of Judah. That it was all well watered means that the goodness and truth are able to grow there, as is established by the symbolism of well watered ground above. Before Jehovah had destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah symbolizes the outer self as destroyed by evil cravings and false or distorted convictions. This can be seen from the symbolism of Sodom as evil cravings and from the symbolism of Gomorrah as distorted convictions. These two are what destroy our outer self and divide it from our inner self. These two were also what destroyed the earliest church before the flood. Cravings for evil belong to the will, and distortions adopted as convictions belong to the intellect. And when the two of them take over, our whole outer self is destroyed. Once destroyed, it also detaches from our inner self. Detaches.
Detaches.
And disconnects. Remove. Detaches from our inner self, not that our soul or spirit separates from the body, but that the goodness and truth coming from our soul or spirit does. Then goodness and truth no longer influence us except in a distant way. I will say more about this influence elsewhere by the Lord's divine mercy. The Lord came into the world because the outer self in the human race had been ruined in this way, and its link with the inner self, that is, with goodness and truth, had been broken. He came into the world then to join and unite his outer self with his inner, or in other words, to join and unite his human quality with his divine. The present verse describes the character of the outer self when united to the inner, at least before Jehovah had destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. It was like the garden of Jehovah, like the land of Egypt as you come to Zoar. Like the garden of Jehovah symbolizes the rational ideas of the outer self. This can be seen from the symbolism of Jehovah's garden as intelligence, discussed in section 100, and so as the rational plane, which is midway between the inner self and the outer. The rational plane is the same thing as the intelligence of the outer self. The term garden of Jehovah is used when our rational mind is heavenly or when it comes from a heavenly origin, as it did in the people of the earliest church. Isaiah speaks of it this way: Jehovah will comfort Zion, he will comfort all its wastelands, and he will make its wilderness like Eden and its desert like a garden of Jehovah. Joy and gladness will be found in it, acclamation and the voice of song. Acclamation, like proclamation.
Acclamation.
Mm, it's like shouting for joy, exclamation. Mhm. Acclamation and exclamation. The term garden of God, on the other hand, is used when our rational mind is spiritual or when it comes from a spiritual origin, as it did in the people of the ancient church. Ezekiel speaks of it this way: You were full of wisdom and perfect in beauty in Eden, the garden of God. Human rationality, mhm, human rationality is compared to a garden because of a representative type of garden that appears in heaven. Human rationality is what presents itself in this way and no other, when something heavenly and spiritual from the Lord acts on it. In fact, it even presents the sight of
Lush.
lush, like luxury, luxuriant,
Luxuriant.
luxuriant, luxuriant, oh, luxuriant, lush. Of lush parks whose magnificence and beauty,
Magnificence.
magnificence and beauty exceed anything the human imagination can invent. Seed.
Exceed.
Seed. Mm-hmm. Exceed anything the human imagination can invent. Exceed. This is the effect that results when heavenly spiritual light flows in from the Lord, as mentioned before. In it is not the pleasures and beautiness and beauties. Pleasures and beauties themselves of these parks they touch the heart, but the heavenly spiritual entities alive inside them. Like the land of Egypt, as you come to Zor, symbolizes facts acquired as a result of their desire for what is good, and as the following symbolism indicates, Egypt, which is discussed in and which is treated in a good sense, symbolizes factual knowledge, and Zor symbolizes the desire for what is good. The city of Zor was not far from Sodom, and it was where Lot escaped to when angels rescued him from the conflagration of Sodom. Conflagration.
Conflagration.
Conflagration, like big fire. Conflagration of Sodom, as reported in Genesis. Conflagration. Zoar is also mentioned in Genesis 14:2, Deuteronomy, Isaiah, Jeremiah. Here too, it symbolizes desires, and since it symbolizes the desire for what is good, in the opposite sense, which is the usual sense, it also symbolizes the desire for what is evil. Our outer self has three components: rationality, the facts we know, and our physical senses. Rationality lies within. Knowledge is more superficial, and the physical senses from the surface.
Okay, I have a question for you, man, Mr. Swedenborg Emmanuel. What is it all about? What is this book all about?
Application, do you mean? Yes, your book. Are you asking about application?
No, not the application. I'm talking about the book. What is
Book.
it talking about?
It's Secrets of Heaven by Manuel Swedenborg. You can see this book. It's this book, volume 2. I'm reading
Mm.
Manuel
So
Swedenborg.
is it religious?
It's about spiritual meaning of
Religious
the book
book?
of Genesis of the Bible. Yeah, it's religious, but
Are you
it's like
there?
many different understanding, like about spirit, because it's about spiritual meaning. It's not about literal meaning of book of
Okay.
Genesis, but it's about spiritual meaning because it's Swedenborg. The physical senses here are sight and hearing. Do you see? It's about mind. Actually, it's about what is going right now in our mind. Like this, rationality is what connects our inner and outer selves, and the nature of that connection depends on the nature of our rationality. The physical senses here are sight and hearing. Our rational capacity, though, is worthless by itself if our feelings or desires do not flow into it, activate it, and bring it to life. It follows then that the quality of our rational capacity mirrors the quality of our feelings. When desire for goodness flows into our rational mind, it turns into a desire for truth there. The opposite happens when a desire for evil enters. And since the facts we know put themselves at the disposal of our rational mind and serve as tools for its use, it also follows that our feelings act on the facts we possess and arrange them into in
Arrange.
organize and arrange them in some kind of order. Nothing in our outer self ever shows any life except emotion. Positive emotions come down from the heavenly plane, or in other words, from heavenly love which bestows life on everything it touches. Bestows.
bestows,
It's like grant bestows life on everything it touches. It even brings life to negative emotions or corrupt desires. Loving goodness constantly flows in from the Lord, and it flows through the inner self into the outer. People under the sway of negative emotions. Sway.
sway,
Like power, influence. Under the sway of negative emotions or corrupt desires, pervert that goodness, but the life that comes with it still remains. To understand this, look at the way physical objects receive the sun's rays, but by way of comparison, some objects, diamonds, rubies, hyacinth, hyacinth, hyacinths, sapphires, and other precious stones, for instance, take the light very beautifully and turn it into gorgeous colors. Gorgeous.
gorgeous,
Gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous, and turns it into gorgeous colors, and turn it into gorgeous colors. Others do not, but turn it into hideous colors instead. Another illustration is the hideous,
hideous,
hideous like disgusting. Hideous colors instead. Another illustration is the very character of different people. Some welcome the kindness of others with open arms, but some turn those kindness to evil. All of this indicates what factual knowledge acquired as a result of the desire for goodness is. This being what the land of Egypt, as you come to Zohar, symbolizes when the rational mind is like a garden of Jehovah. The symbolism here is that the Lord witnessed his outer self at its most beautiful when united with his inner self. This can be seen from the deeper meaning in which Abram represents the Lord's inner self and God his outer self. The beauty of the outer self when united to the inner self cannot be described because it does not occur in any other human being than the Lord. Any such beauty that does occur in a person or angel comes from the Lord. It can be seen in the image of the Lord's outward self as this appears in the heavens, but only to a very small degree. The three heavens are images of the Lord's outer being, and their beauty cannot be described in any way that will present a true, comprehensible idea of it to alone. Just as everything in the Lord is infinite, so everything in heaven is limitless. Heaven's boundlessness is an image of the Lord's infinity. hmm I think that's all.